Welcome to Honey Bee. Real stories of love, lies, and betrayal, where every truth stings. Let's begin. My ex-wife became an investment banker and publicly shamed me just for asking to invest $170. She mocked, "We don't serve poor beggars here." Minutes later, I withdrew my $8.5 billion portfolio, and the entire bank froze. My name is Reed Lawson, and let me tell you about the day I walked into Soul and Trust Investment Bank with nothing but a crumpled $20 bill in my pocket and a dream that would soon become their worst nightmare. I wasn't looking for trouble that Tuesday morning. Honestly, I was just trying to do something meaningful for once. You know how it feels when you find something you truly believe in? That's rare these days, especially in this cutthroat city where everyone's chasing a paycheck and no one cares about anything real. The startup was called Green Leaf Solutions, a bright kid from Brooklyn who figured out how to turn food waste into biodegradable packaging. Smart kid. He reminded me of myself 20 years ago, back when I still thought the world owed me a shot. I'd been following his progress for months, watching him bootstrap his way through prototype after prototype, surviving on ramen and sheer determination. They needed investors, and I had exactly $170 burning a hole in my checking account. Not much, sure, but hey, every mighty oak began as a tiny acorn, right? So there I was, stepping through those grand glass doors that probably cost more than most people earn in a year. Wearing my favorite jeans, the ones with a hole near the left knee that my ex-wife used to nag me about, and a plain gray hoodie I'd picked up at Target. No tailored suit, no leather briefcase, no entourage of yes-men trailing behind like I was some Wall Street titan. Just me. Reed Lawson. A regular guy with calloused hands and a stubborn streak a mile wide. The lobby was all marble and chrome, the kind of place designed to make you feel small before you even speak. Business people in $1,000 suits glided past like sharks in designer clothing, phones glued to their ears, barking orders about mergers and buyouts. The whole scene reeked of old money and fresh arrogance. I almost turned around right then, almost said, "Forget it," and walked back to my beat-up Honda Civic parked 3 blocks away, because I wasn't about to pay $20 for valet. But I didn't. Something inside me, maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was hope, kept my feet moving toward the service counter. The woman behind the marble desk was typing away, not bothering to look up, even though I'd been standing there for a full minute. Professional courtesy? Forget it. Finally, she lifted her head, and that's when my world tilted sideways, like a record skipping on a warped turntable. Mira Glenmott. My ex-wife. The woman who walked out 5 years ago with half our furniture, most of our savings, and every shred of my faith in decency. She was dressed in a power suit that likely cost more than I made in a month when we were married. Her auburn hair pulled back in that tight bun she wore when she wanted to intimidate. The years had been kind. She looked polished, successful, like she'd stepped out of a Forbes feature on women shattering glass ceilings. For a second, neither of us spoke. I saw the recognition flash in her green eyes, quickly followed by something unmistakable: disgust. Not surprise. Not awkwardness. Pure, unfiltered disgust, like she'd just stepped in something foul. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with the same condescension I remembered from our worst fights. "Reed Lawson, what brings you to civilization?" I cleared my throat, determined to stay professional. "I'd like to make an investment. Small amount, but it's for a good cause. There's this green energy startup." That's when she started laughing. Not a chuckle. Not a giggle. A full-blown laugh that sliced through the quiet lobby like a siren. Heads turned. Conversations died. Even the security guard by the elevators looked over. "An investment," she said, loud enough for half the floor to hear. "You want to make an investment? How much are we talking, Reed? Your lunch money." My face burned, but I kept my voice steady. $170. The laughter exploded. A couple of junior execs at a nearby table snickered, whispering behind their hands like high schoolers watching someone get picked on in the cafeteria. Mira stood up, smoothing her skirt with theatrical precision. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to anyone within earshot, "we have a high roller in the house. Reed Lawson wants to invest his pocket change with us." More laughter rippled through the lobby. A security camera in the corner stared down like a mechanical eye, recording every humiliating second. Then came the words that changed everything. "We don't serve poor beggars here." The room fell dead silent. Not the calm quiet of a library or the focused hush of work. This was the silence before a storm, when even the birds stopped singing because they sensed disaster. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, dozens of eyes drilling into me, waiting to see how the beggar would react to being put in his place. Part of me wanted to argue, to defend myself, to explain I wasn't some homeless guy looking for a handout. Another part wanted to slink away, vanish into the crowd on the sidewalk, pretend this never happened. Instead, I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. I smiled. Not a bitter smirk, not a wounded attempt to save face. A genuine, almost peaceful smile. I nodded once at Mira, as if she'd just shared a weather update, then turned and walked toward the exit. But as I left, my mind was already working, calculating, planning. Because Mira Glenmott had just made the biggest mistake of her career, and she had no idea what was coming. The glass doors closed behind me with a soft whoosh, and I stepped back into the real world, where regular people drive regular cars and worry about regular problems. But I wasn't regular anymore. Not really. And I hadn't been for a long time. I just let them all believe I was. Nobody in that marble palace had any idea who they were really dealing with. And honestly, that's exactly how I'd planned it for the past 5 years. When you've been burned as badly as I was, you learn to keep your cards close. So close that even your reflection doesn't know what you're holding. It all started the day Mira walked out on our marriage. I remember it like it was yesterday. I came home from my construction job to find half the apartment emptied and a note on the kitchen counter that might as well have been written in poison. "Read, I can't waste any more of my life waiting for you to become somebody. Don't try to find me." Real classy, right? She even took the coffee maker. Honestly, that hurt more than losing her. But here's the thing about rock bottom. It gives you a solid foundation to build on. 3 weeks after she left, I got the call that changed everything. My grandfather's lawyer, a classic old-school guy named Patterson who wore bow ties and still used a rotary phone, told me I'd inherited something from Grandpa Joe. Grandpa Joe had always been the family enigma, the guy who worked nights on the railroad but somehow sent 3 kids to college and bought a house on the lake. Turns out, that wasn't all he'd done. "Your grandfather was quite the investor," Patterson said, sliding a heavy manila folder across his desk. "He left instructions that this inheritance remain confidential until you turned 35. Congratulations, son. You're now a very wealthy man." Wealthy didn't even begin to cover it. Grandpa Joe had spent 40 years quietly buying small parcels of land, investing in overlooked startups, and reinvesting every penny. By the time he passed, his portfolio was worth just over $3 million. Not billionaire territory, but enough to make a man think twice. Most people would have bought a sports car or taken a trip to Europe. Me? I disappeared. Told everyone I was going to find myself, maybe travel the country. Classic midlife crisis stuff. No one questioned it. Instead, I spent 6 months holed up in a 1-bedroom studio above a Chinese restaurant in Queens, devouring every book I could find on finance, investment strategies, and corporate structures. I studied Warren Buffett, Ray Dalio, shell companies, private equity, offshore banking, until my eyes ached. Most importantly, I learned how to move invisibly in the financial world. That's when K. Rammel was born. Sounds fancy, doesn't it? Like some European aristocrat or a mysterious billionaire from a spy novel. Truth is, it's just my middle name, Kendrick, and my grandmother's maiden name reversed. Simple, but it worked. K. Rammel became the face of Redbridge Equities, a private investment firm that specialized in finding hidden gems. While Mira climbed the corporate ladder at Solon Trust, schmoozing clients and playing office politics, I was quietly building an empire. Started small, bought into a struggling tech company developing better battery tech. When Tesla took off, guess who had a locked-in supply contract? Then I moved into renewable energy, pharmaceutical startups, real estate in overlooked markets. The beauty of being K. Rammel? Nobody connected him to Reed Lawson, the construction worker from Brooklyn whose wife had left him for being a loser. Reed Lawson drove a beat-up Honda and lived in a studio. K. Rammel owned a multi-billion-dollar portfolio and had Fortune 500 CEOs begging for meetings. But here's the kicker. Mira had no idea that half of K. Ramel's massive portfolio was being managed by none other than Solon Trust Investment Bank. Through a web of custodians and shell companies, Redbridge Equities had quietly become one of their biggest clients. Every month, Solon Trust collected management fees on investments that ultimately belonged to the man they just called a beggar. I watched from the shadows as they published glowing quarterly reports, bragging about assets under management, performance, exclusive clients. They threw parties, gave interviews, and all the while, they were dancing to music played by a ghost they didn't know existed. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mira had spent years climbing to senior VP, managing accounts worth hundreds of millions, building relationships with high-net-worth clients, never once realizing her biggest client was the same man she'd written off as worthless. Every quarterly statement she reviewed, every portfolio meeting she attended, somewhere in that mix was money that traced back to Reed Lawson, the failure she'd divorced. The construction worker who couldn't afford nice dinners was now funding the bonuses that paid for her designer suits. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about building something real while everyone else played pretend. While they cared about titles and corner offices, I was creating actual value, actual wealth, actual power, the kind that doesn't need a nameplate or a reserved parking spot. But sitting on that iron bench outside Solon Trust, listening to Mira's laughter echo through the glass, I realized something important. Sometimes the most powerful move isn't the one nobody sees coming. Sometimes it's the one that reminds everyone exactly who they're dealing with. The bench was one of those fancy city ones meant to make downtown look classy, but to me, it might as well have been a throne. I sat there for 30 seconds, watching the suits rush past, too busy checking their phones to notice the guy in jeans about to bring down one of the state's biggest banks. Funny thing about real power, it's quietest right before it makes the most noise. I pulled out my old iPhone, had it for 3 years. If it ain't broke, why fix it? The irony wasn't lost on me. I was about to move more money with this beat-up device than most people see in a lifetime. Ida Marino's number was third in my favorites, right after my pizza place and my barber. That should tell you something. Ida had been my legal counsel for 4 years, ever since I needed someone sharp enough to handle the complex web of shell companies that made up the K. Ramel empire. She was a bulldog in a Chanel suit, the kind of lawyer who could find loopholes in a circle and make opposing counsel cry. The phone rang twice. Reed. This is unexpected. Aren't you supposed to be keeping a low profile today? Change of plans, I said, watching a hot dog vendor cross the street. Amazing how normal life just keeps rolling, even when you're about to drop a financial nuke. I need you to initiate a full asset withdrawal from Solon Trust. A pause. Ida's pauses meant she was already 3 steps ahead, calculating angles like a chess grandmaster. Define full, she said. All 8.5 billion. Every penny Redbridge has with them, investment vehicles, managed funds, custodial accounts. I want it gone by close of business. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear the gears turning. That's going to cause serious waves. Solon Trust probably doesn't have that kind of liquidity. They'll have to sell positions, call in favors, maybe even borrow from other banks. Good, I said. Let them scramble. What happened in there, Reed? This isn't like you. You're usually Mr. Patience, Mr. Long-Term Strategy. This feels, she searched for the word, personal. I looked up at the glass tower. Somewhere behind those tinted windows, Mira was probably still laughing with her colleagues about the beggar who wanted to invest his lunch money. It is personal. But it's also business. Bad business to insult clients, even small ones, especially when you don't know who you're really dealing with. All right, Ida said. Papers shuffled in the background. I'll start with the offshore accounts. They'll move quietly. Then the domestic portfolios. This is like pulling the bottom card from a house of cards. You realize that. That's the idea. And when they start asking questions, because they will, probably within the hour, tell them the truth. Tell them Reed Lawson requested the withdrawal. Reed Lawson, the construction worker, the failure, the beggar. I want them to know exactly who just pulled the rug out. Jesus, Reed. What did they do to you in there? I stopped walking, remembering Mira's laugh, how it cut through the lobby like a blade. They reminded me why I left this world behind. And why I built a better one without them. Okay, I'm on it. But Reed, you need to understand what this means. Once I pull the trigger, there's no going back. Solon Trust will panic. Their stock will tank. People will lose jobs. Retirement accounts will take a hit. Then maybe they should have thought about that before humiliating someone trying to do a good deed. Fair enough. I'll also notify the Financial Regulatory Board, cover our legal bases. If Solon Trust tries to freeze the accounts or claim irregularities, I want us bulletproof. Good thinking. How long until the first domino falls? 20 minutes, maybe 30. I'll start with Europe, they're still open. We can move about $2 billion through our London partners before Solon Trust even knows what hit them. Then cascade through Asia Pacific. By the time New York wakes up, we'll be pulling the domestic portfolios. I reached my Honda, keys in hand. The parking meter still had 40 minutes left, but I wouldn't be needing it. Do it, I said. For what it's worth, I think they picked the wrong guy to mess with. Yeah, I said, looking back at the glass tower one last time. They really did. I hung up, engine running, AC blowing, watching the world go on with its normal Tuesday rhythm. In 20 minutes, those elevators would be moving faster, carrying more panicked people than usual. Risk managers would be pulling up spreadsheets. Executives would be calling clients. And somewhere in that maze of marble and chrome, Mira Glenmott was about to learn that some jokes cost more than others. The beauty was, I didn't have to do anything else. I'd given the order. Ida would execute it. Gravity would handle the rest. Sometimes the most devastating attacks are the ones where you just step back and let your enemy's system collapse under its own weight. I put the car in drive and pulled away, leaving Solon Trust in my rearview mirror. By tomorrow, they'd remember this day as the one everything changed. And they'd remember Reed Lawson as the man who changed it. Inside the glass tower, the first sign of trouble came at 2:47 p.m., a soft ping on Martin Yun's computer. Martin had been head of risk management for 8 years, long enough to know that soft pings usually meant loud disasters. He glanced at his screen mid-bite of his usual turkey sandwich, same lunch for 10 years because his wife said it was healthier than pizza. The alert looked routine, large portfolio movement. European markets. Nothing unusual, rich clients moved money all the time. But then another ping. And another. Within 5 minutes, his screen looked like a Christmas tree having a seizure. Portfolio withdrawal, account 47291. Liquidation notice, London Division. Emergency Transfer Protocol, K. Rammel Holdings. Martin's sandwich turned to cardboard. K. Rammel was their whale, the mysterious billionaire whose investments made up nearly 15% of Solon Trust's total assets. In banking, 15% might not sound like much, until you're talking billions. His phone rang before he could process it. London office. Urgent. Martin, we've got a situation, said Sarah Chun, European Operations Manager. She sounded like she'd been running a marathon on espresso. Redbridge just pulled everything, every position, every fund, every account. They're liquidating their entire European portfolio. How much? Martin asked, already knowing the answer. 2.3 billion. It's all legal, but Jesus, Martin, it's like watching someone yank the foundation from under a skyscraper. His other line blinked. Then his cell. Then the emergency alert system, meant for actual emergencies, not random Tuesday meltdowns. Sarah, I've got to call you back. London's just the appetizer. He hung up, grabbed the next call. Yun here. Martin, this is Tokyo. Multiple Redbridge accounts liquidating simultaneously. What's the word? Before he could answer, his computer chimed, not a soft ping. A red alert screaming, liquidity warning, domestic portfolios. Estimated withdrawal, $2.2 billion. Immediate execution requested. Oh shit, Martin whispered, loud enough that Jennifer from compliance looked over. Martin never swore at work. Martin said, darn, when he spilled coffee. His desk phone rang. CEO direct line. Martin. My office. Bring whoever handles the Rammel account. Sir, technically it's handled through third-party custodians. I don't care if it's handled by train monkeys. Find someone who knows something and get them up here. Our stock just dropped 12% in 20 minutes. Martin's blood pressure spiked. If the stock was already moving, word was out. In finance, rumors travel faster than bad sushi at a wedding. On my way, sir. He grabbed his laptop and jogged to the elevator, mind racing. If Redbridge was pulling out completely, they'd have to sell assets fast. Stocks, bonds, commodities, whatever they could get, no waiting for good prices. Forced liquidation. Career suicide. The elevator ride felt like 6 years. Texts flooded in. What the hell is happening? Meanwhile, 3 floors down, Mira was holding court in the break room, still riding high from her morning performance. She'd gathered junior associates, regaling them with an exaggerated version of the pathetic beggar who wanted to invest his pocket change. "You should have seen his face," she said, waving her coffee cup. This loser in ratty jeans and a hoodie, asking to invest $170 like he was a high roller. What kind of person shows up at an investment bank with lunch money? The room chuckled on cue. Nobody mentioned they'd started with similar amounts. Nobody wanted to be next. The best part, Mira continued, was when I told him, "We don't serve poor beggars." You could have heard a pin drop. Pure theater. Then Martin burst in, laptop clutched like a life raft, face pale. "Mira," he said, voice tight with panic. "What did you do to a man named Reed Lawson?" Laughter died. Reed Lawson. Earlier today, what exactly did you say to him? Mira's smirk faltered. "He's nobody, Martin. Just some guy off the street wanting to invest his allowance." Martin glanced at his screen. His career flashed before his eyes. Reed Lawson is the primary contact for every Redbridge account. And Redbridge just pulled $8.5 billion out of our bank. The break room fell silent, only the coffee machine gurgling. Mira's face went from confident to terrified in 3 seconds. "That's impossible." Martin stared at her like the Titanic's captain insisting, "No iceberg." By noon, the boardroom on the 42nd floor looked like a war room. Mahogany table buried under laptops, spreadsheets, empty coffee cups. The city skyline mocked them through floor-to-ceiling windows. Mira sat in a leather chair worth more than most cars, but it felt like nails. Her perfect hair was fraying. Her power suit now felt like armor 3 sizes too small. Around the table, James Thornton, CEO, aged 5 years in 2 hours, Patricia Wells, CFO, scribbling calculations, David Chong, head of client relations, checking his phone for miracles, Martin, still clutching his laptop, tie loose, composure shattered. Thornton spoke, voice deadly calm. "Let me get this straight. Our largest client, 15% of our assets, just liquidated his entire portfolio because one of our senior VPs publicly humiliated him in our lobby." Mira opened her mouth, but Thornton cut her off. And this client, whom we never properly identified, despite managing $8.5 billion of his money, walked in asking to invest $170, presumably as a customer service test. And our response was to call him a beggar in front of witnesses. Silence. Thick as a knife. Then the door opened. I walked in. This time, I dressed up, clean button-down, sport jacket from Men's Warehouse. Same jeans. Some things don't change. The reaction was instant. Mira went white. Thornton started to rise, then froze, unsure who I was. The others stared, trying to reconcile Reed Lawson, the construction worker, with K. Rammel, the billionaire. I nodded politely, took the head chair, Thornton's usual spot. Nobody stopped me. Confidence wins 90% of the game. And I'd been playing for 5 years. Martin cleared his throat. "Mr. Rammel. Mr. Lawson. I'm not sure how to." "It's fine," I said, placing a manila folder on the table, thick enough to impress, not so thick as to intimidate. Inside, transfer authorizations, closure documents, final. "I know this is confusing. Let me clarify." I slid a sheet to the center, Redbridge Equities, transfer authorization, complete portfolio closure, $8.5 billion. This morning, I came as Reed Lawson, construction worker, hoping to invest $170 in a company I believe in. I was treated like garbage by someone who should have known better. I looked straight at Mira, who looked like she couldn't breathe. This afternoon, I'm here as K. Rammel, founder of Redbridge Equities, to formally terminate our business relationship. Thornton found his voice. Mr. Lawson, Mr. Rammel, surely we can work something out. What happened was unacceptable. Disciplinary action will be taken. Perhaps compensation for the inconvenience. $15 million, I said quietly. Silence. Thornton blinked. I'm sorry. That's what Solon Trust earned in management fees for my accounts last year. Not bad for managing a beggar's money, is it? Mira made a sound between a whimper and a gasp, staring at the documents like hieroglyphics. The withdrawal is already in progress. By close of business, every penny will be gone. Europe's done. Asia Pacific wrapping up. Domestic portfolios cleared in 2 hours. Patricia Wells spoke. Mr. Rammel, you must understand, this magnitude of withdrawal will have serious consequences. Not just for us, but for the broader market. You shouldn't have insulted me, I said simply. I stood, leaving the folder. The paperwork is there. My legal team has filed with regulators. Everything's above board. I walked to Mira. This isn't about revenge, Mira, I said, just loud enough for all to hear. It's about respect, something you never learned to give. I turned to the room. Gentlemen, it's been educational. Mira, it's been enlightening. I paused at the door. Oh, and James, you might want to draft that press release. This story will be all over financial news by tomorrow. The door clicked shut behind me. 42 floors below, the city carried on, unaware that one of its most respected banks had just learned a costly lesson in customer service. The elevator down felt like a victory lap in reverse. My phone buzzed. Text from Ida, European transfers complete. Asia Pacific ahead of schedule. Domestic liquidating now. You've officially become Solon Trust's worst nightmare. I smiled, pushing through the same glass doors. The security guard who watched Mira humiliate me nodded politely, oblivious that the guy in jeans had just cost his employer more than most small nations earn in a year. Amazing how invisible you can be when people don't expect to see you. My Honda was still parked 3 blocks away, 2 minutes left on the meter. I fed it another quarter. Old habits die hard, even when you're rich enough to buy the parking authority. As I drove away, my phone buzzed like an angry hornet. Calls from unknown numbers. Voicemails. Then 3 more in quick succession. Word was spreading, faster than gossip at a reunion. Then came the call I pulled over for. Mira. I stared at the screen, her name flashing like a neon sign of desperation. Part of me wanted to answer. The other remembered her laughter in the lobby. I declined. Text, read, please. We need to talk. This is insane. $8 billion over a misunderstanding? Answer your damn phone. I turned the phone face down and kept driving. Behind me, Solon Trust was erupting into chaos. Martin was probably running between departments like his hair was on fire. Legal was scrambling for loopholes. But Ida was too good. Every document filed correctly. Every notice observed. Every requirement met. Redbridge wasn't breaking rules. We were just taking our ball and going home, perfectly legal when you own the ball and the court. The beauty, its simplicity. No schemes. No insider trading. No violations. Just a client deciding he no longer valued his service provider. Capitalism in its purest form. Vote with your wallet. And when your wallet holds $8.5 billion, your vote carries weight. My phone buzzed again. Another text. You've ruined me. I pulled into a gas station, engine running, AC humming. You've ruined me. As if it were a natural disaster. I typed, no, Mira. You did that when you laughed in my face. Then I blocked her. Truth was, I hadn't ruined her. She'd ruined herself the moment she decided a person's worth was measured by their bank balance. She'd chosen cruelty over kindness, humiliation over courtesy, forgotten that every person deserves dignity, no matter how much they invest. I'd just revealed the consequences. Some call it karma. Some call it justice. I call it business. Back at Solon Trust, emergency protocols were in full swing. Thornton was probably on a call with the board, explaining how their most profitable client vanished in one afternoon. PR was crafting statements about strategic realignments. Nobody wanted to admit their senior VP insulted a billionaire. Fund managers were dumping assets fast, no time for good prices. Compliance was pulling records, finding red flags in hindsight. But hindsight is 20/20 when you're staring at a crater where your biggest client used to be. The irony. They'd managed K. Rammel's money flawlessly for years. Solid returns. Reasonable fees. Professional service. If Mira had just treated Reed Lawson with basic courtesy, if she'd taken his $170 with a smile, none of this happens. Redbridge would still be their whale. Mira would still be a rising star. Instead, she was probably staring at her screen, watching her career implode. All because she forgot the first rule of customer service. Treat every customer like they might be your most important one, because you never know when they actually are. 2 days later, I sat on my lakehouse deck, coffee in hand, the Financial Tribune spread on my grandfather's 1967 wooden table. The lake was glassy, reflecting pine trees like a mirror that never heard of bad news. A loon called, probably wondering why humans complicate things when life could be fishing and naps. The house was modest by billionaire standards, 3 bedrooms, original 80s appliances, a deck that had seen better decades. But it was mine, paid for with honest money. A place where Reed Lawson could exist without worrying about portfolios. The paper felt heavier that morning. Page 3, Business section. Solon Trust issues public apology following client incident. I leaned back in my creaking Adirondack chair and read with quiet satisfaction. Solon Trust Investment Bank issued a formal apology yesterday after an incident led to the departure of one of its largest private clients. CEO James Thornton acknowledged a senior executive treated a potential client inappropriately during a recent visit. I laughed. Inappropriately was corporate speak for complete butthole. The article continued with boilerplate, regrettable incidents, commitment to excellence. But buried in the middle, we sincerely apologize to Mr. Reed Lawson for a regrettable incident involving one of our senior executives. Respect and integrity remain our core values. We are taking steps to ensure all clients, regardless of investment size, receive professional treatment. There it was, in black and white, for every financial pro to read over their lattes. Solon Trust, who called me a beggar 2 days ago, was now kissing my ass in a full-page apology. But the real kicker was in the final paragraph. The bank also announced the resignation of Senior Vice President Mira Glenmott, effective immediately. Miss Glenmott had been with Solon Trust for 7 years and was considered a rising star. I read it 3 times, savoring each word. Mira, married me when I was nobody, divorced me when I was still nobody, was now unemployed. Not demoted. Not transferred. Resigned. In corporate terms, that meant fired with dignity. I folded the paper, walked inside to my converted bedroom office, computer, filing cabinets, a bankruptcy auction desk chair. On the wall, a wooden frame with 2 photos. One, my grandfather in railroad overalls, dirt under his nails, pride in his eyes. The other, my grandmother in her garden, sun hat, basket of homegrown tomatoes. Below them, a quote she used to say, "Whenever the neighbors gossiped about people who'd fallen on hard times, let your silence plant seeds. When it blooms, they'll choke on their own weeds." I unpinned the newspaper clipping and placed it beneath her photo. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd always believed the universe settled accounts in its own time. The clipping would stay there, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that treating people with respect costs nothing, and treating them badly can cost everything. Pulling $8.5 billion from Solon Trust was just the opening move. The real satisfaction came 3 weeks later. I sat in my same beat-up Honda, some things don't change, outside Meridian Community Bank. A small institution in a working-class neighborhood, specializing in microloans and neighborhood development. Where Solon Trust had marble and glass towers, Meridian operated from a converted Victorian house. The kind of place where kids still play stickball and old-timers argue about baseball. I'd researched its president, Maria Santos, a former social worker tired of seeing good people denied loans over imperfect credit. She started the bank on a radical idea. Character matters more than profit margins. The meeting lasted 47 minutes. I walked in as Reed Lawson, construction worker with a crazy idea. I walked out having committed the entire $8.5 billion to the Community Futures Fund. Not a loan. Not an investment for massive returns. A non-profit portfolio, designed to do what Solon Trust never considered, actually help people. The irony was sweeter than my grandmother's apple pie. The same money that paid for Solon Trust's marble lobbies and executive bonuses would now fund scholarships for kids whose parents worked 2 jobs. The same capital that bought Mira's designer suits would back sustainable startups run by people in thrift store clothes. But here's the part that would have made Mira's head explode. I insured exactly $170, the same amount she laughed at, was automatically donated every month to 500 different scholarship accounts. Not because they needed that exact amount, but to prove a point that would echo through finance for years. Every month, somewhere in America, a kid got $170, funded by the man their benefactors would never meet. Every month, 500 families got help from the guy called a beggar for trying to invest that same amount. The paperwork was elegant in its simplicity. No complex derivatives. No offshore schemes. Just straightforward investments in housing co-ops, education, small businesses in communities traditional banks had written off. Maria Santos understood what Solon Trust never did. Respect isn't about portfolio size. It's about seeing the humanity in every person who walks through your door. When I told her about Solon Trust, she shook her head and said, "Their loss is our community's gain." That night, on my deck with a beer, watching the sunset paint the lake gold, I realized something. Pulling my money from Solon Trust felt like justice. Putting it into the Community Futures Fund felt like purpose. One settled scores. The other changed the game. The beautiful thing about real wealth isn't what it buys. It's what it builds for others. And while Mira updated her LinkedIn, wondering how her career imploded, the money she dismissed as worthless was quietly changing lives. One $170 donation at a time. For months after Solon Trust learned the most expensive customer service lesson in banking history, I hosted a dinner party. Not the flashy billionaire affair. Something quieter. More meaningful. Guests, old construction friends who still didn't know about K. Rammel, young entrepreneurs funded by the Community Futures Fund, former Solon Trust employees who quit in disgust after learning how they treated a man wanting to invest $170. My lake house had never hosted anything fancier than a poker game. But that night, it was the perfect place to celebrate what mattered. We grilled burgers on the same deck where I'd read about Mira's resignation. Shared stories about second chances, small beginnings. Talked about investing that changed lives, not just reports. That's when Helena Glenmott showed up. I was refilling drinks when I saw her through the kitchen window, standing at the edge of my driveway, unsure. Myra's younger sister had always been the decent one, the teacher who chose helping kids over chasing profit. Seeing her here, uninvited, nervous, told me everything. "Reed," she said as I opened the door. "I'm sorry to interrupt. I need to talk to you about Mira." I gestured to the garden path, away from the laughter. "She's been having a rough time. She's broken, Reed. Completely broken. No job. No prospects. She's been blacklisted. She didn't know who you were. She had no idea." I stopped walking. "Exactly. That's the point, Helena. She didn't know, and she didn't care to find out. She saw someone who looked different and decided he was worthless. That's not ignorance. That's character." Helena pulled a crumpled pamphlet from her purse, Riverside Community Center, a program I'd quietly funded in Mira's old neighborhood. The same streets where she'd learned to look down on people like her past self. "Tell her the man she humiliated built this," I said, handing it back. "And tell her it's not named after me. It's named after the people she called beggars." These days, I start every morning walking through the community garden. My first investment, reclaiming an abandoned lot in East Brooklyn. It's not a headline maker. Just a quiet patch of green, tomatoes in neat rows, sunflowers reaching skyward. The garden doesn't know I'm a billionaire. The kids on the swing set their parents built from donated lumber don't care that I was married to a woman who called their families beggars. The elderly tending herbs see another guy in jeans who shows up early and doesn't mind getting dirt under his nails. There's a small plaque on the gate, weathered bronze, simple words, respect is grown quietly. Most people walk past it. That's fine. The best lessons are the ones nobody notices until they need them. This morning, like every morning, I stopped by Mrs. Rodriguez's corner. She grows the best peppers in 3 boroughs. She's 86, speaks mostly Spanish, makes coffee strong enough to wake the dead. She doesn't know the man who funded this garden brought down Solon Trust with a whisper. The world still doesn't know I'm K. Rammel. And I like it that way. Power that needs to announce itself isn't power. It's noise. Real strength grows in silence. Takes root in small acts of kindness. Blooms when nobody's watching. Sometimes I think about Mira. Wonder if she drives past this place, remembers the neighborhood she was ashamed of. Wonder if she understands yet, the greatest revenge isn't destroying someone. It's becoming everything they never had the courage to be. But mostly, I tend the garden and watch children play. Knowing the boy who couldn't afford fancy dinners became the man who built playgrounds for kids whose parents work 3 jobs. The storm nobody predicted turned out to be the quiet rain that makes everything grow. And somewhere in the city, in boardrooms where they whisper about the day a construction worker brought down a trust, they're learning. The most dangerous people aren't the ones who scream. They're the ones who smile politely, say nothing, and let their actions plant seeds that bloom into consequences. I am the storm that whispers. And Mira. She lives forever with the memory of one moment, one laugh, one insult that cost her everything she thought mattered. While I tend gardens and change the world, one seed at a time.